If yesterday Washington still believed it was managing the Iran crisis, this morning destroyed that illusion completely. The problem is no longer whether America can bomb another facility, impose another sanction, or threaten another deadline. The problem is that the entire strategic map may have changed before the world was ready to admit it. For years, Western officials spoke about Iran as if it were always one step away, always delayed, always pressured, always contained. Tehran was described as weakened by sanctions, surrounded by enemies, and trapped beneath the weight of its own economic isolation. But history has a cruel habit. The country everyone calls cornered is often the country that studies survival most carefully. Now the question facing Washington is not simple anymore. It is not, can America strike Iran? America has the aircraft, the bombs, the bases, and the firepower. That was never the real issue. The real question is darker. What happens if the country being struck has already crossed the line from nuclear ambition into nuclear deterrence? This is the moment American strategy becomes trapped by its own old confidence. For decades, Washington mastered the politics of overwhelming force. Iraq could be invaded, Libya could be pressured, Syria could be bombed. Smaller states could be punished from the sky, while American leaders returned home speaking the language of order, freedom, and international security. But Iran is not sitting inside that old category anymore. If Tehran has even a small number of assembled nuclear devices, then every calculation changes. A single hidden warhead can do what hundreds of missiles cannot do. It can paralyze decision makers. It can turn military superiority into political hesitation. It can make the strongest empire in the world pause before pressing a button. And this is why the silence feels so dangerous. Israel is nervous. The Pentagon is cautious. Oil markets are watching Hormuz. China is watching Washington. Russia is watching the precedent. And Iran is watching all of them watch each other. The real crisis is not only the bomb. It is the psychological earthquake created by the possibility of the bomb. Once a state convinces its enemies that destruction may come with retaliation, then survival becomes negotiable on different terms. Power no longer belongs only to the country with more aircraft carriers. It belongs to the country that can make escalation too expensive. So tonight, we must ask the question that nobody in Washington wants to ask publicly. Did America wait too long? Did Israel misread the clock? And did Iran quietly learn the most important lesson of the 21st century? That only countries with a final deterrent are truly left alone. This is where the story begins. Not with a missile launch, not with a speech, but with a terrifying realization. The Middle East may have entered a nuclear age before the world was emotionally prepared to say the words out loud. The most dangerous part of this crisis is not the bomb itself. It is the possibility that Iran did not reach this point alone. For years, Washington treated Iran and North Korea as two separate threats. One belonged to the Middle East, the other belonged to East Asia. Different regions, different wars, different intelligence files. But sanctions have a strange effect on isolated states. Sometimes pressure does not divide them. Sometimes pressure forces them together. North Korea possessed something Iran desperately needed: decades of missile development, underground military engineering, and nuclear testing experience. Iran possessed something Pyongyang desperately needed: oil, money, and access to financial survival networks outside the Pacific region. One side had technology, the other had resources. And once survival becomes more important than ideology, countries begin exchanging whatever keeps their governments alive. This is the part Western officials never wanted to discuss publicly. Because if Tehran received outside assistance overcoming the final technical barriers, then the entire timeline changes. Iran would no longer represent an isolated nuclear project slowly developing under sanctions. It would represent a cooperative deterrence model between sanctioned states learning how to bypass the Western system together. That possibility terrifies Washington. Not because America cannot fight one enemy. America has fought many. The fear is that sanctions may have accidentally created a new underground network beyond Western economic control. Secret shipping routes, quiet financial transfers, engineers moving through third countries, technology exchanged far from international monitoring systems. The more pressure applied, the more valuable cooperation became. And history already showed warning signs. Missile similarities appeared years ago. Intelligence agencies noticed overlapping designs. Reports surfaced about suspicious cargo routes and hidden technical exchanges. But acknowledging the full implication would have forced Washington into an uncomfortable realization. The strategy of isolation might be producing the exact opposite result. Instead of collapse, isolated powers were adapting. This is why the current crisis feels bigger than Iran alone. If Tehran successfully moved closer to nuclear deterrence under maximum sanctions, other countries will study the same lesson carefully. Survive long enough, build hidden networks, trade outside the dollar system, share technology quietly, move underground, avoid direct confrontation until deterrence is complete. That becomes a survival blueprint. And once smaller powers believe that blueprint works, American pressure loses part of its psychological advantage. Sanctions still hurt economies, but they no longer guarantee surrender. That is the real nightmare now keeping strategists awake in Washington. Because the world may be entering an era where isolated states stop fearing the system and start building an alternative beneath it.
America's greatest problem is not whether it has enough firepower. It does. The problem is that Iran is not Iraq. Iraq was a war against a state that could be broken from the outside. Iran is a war against a system built for survival from the inside. That difference changes everything. When Washington attacked Iraq, it believed speed, air power, and shock could collapse the regime before the region understood what had happened. But Iran studied that lesson for 20 years. It watched Iraq fall. It watched Libya surrender its program and later collapse. It watched Ukraine give up nuclear weapons and later face destruction. Tehran reached one conclusion. Weakness invites negotiation only when survival is already guaranteed. Without deterrence, negotiation becomes surrender with better language. This is why bombing Iran is no longer a simple military option. Even if American aircraft destroy visible facilities, what happens next? Does Tehran surrender? Or does it activate hidden networks, missile units, proxy forces, cyber operations, and energy pressure through Hormuz? In Iraq, Washington controlled escalation. In Iran, escalation controls Washington. That is the difference. Iran has geography, population, depth, missiles, underground infrastructure, and the ability to make every American ally in the region feel exposed. A strike may begin in the sky, but the response may come from the sea, from the border, from drones, from oil markets, from cyber systems, or from one missile that changes political history. This is why the Pentagon hesitates. Not because it fears losing a conventional battle, it fears winning the first night and losing the next 6 months. Modern war is not only about destroying targets, it is about controlling consequences. And Iran's entire strategy is built around making consequences uncontrollable. That is why nuclear uncertainty matters so much. Public reports still debate how close Iran truly is to a weapon, and international inspectors have not publicly confirmed an assembled bomb. But strategy does not wait for courtroom proof. Strategy reacts to risk. If Washington believes there is even a small possibility that Tehran has crossed a hidden threshold, then every bomb dropped becomes a gamble with civilization. Iraq could be invaded because Iraq could not impose unbearable costs. Iran cannot be treated the same way because Iran has spent decades preparing to make any attack politically, economically, and psychologically expensive. This is the brutal lesson Washington now faces. The era of easy punishment wars may be ending, and Iran may be the country that proves it. For Israel, the Iran crisis is not theoretical. It is geographic. America can debate options from across an ocean. Europe can issue statements from behind distance. China can calculate quietly from the other side of Asia. But Israel lives inside the range of the problem. That is why its fear is different. It is immediate, physical, and existential. The nightmare is not 1,000 missiles. The nightmare is one missile getting through. Israel has spent years building layered air defense systems, and those systems are impressive. Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow, radar networks, American support, rapid interception, emergency coordination. On paper, this looks like a wall. But in nuclear strategy, a wall does not need to fail completely. It only needs to fail once. That is the terrifying mathematics behind Israel's anxiety. If 100 missiles are launched and 99 are intercepted, politicians may call that success. Markets may calm down. Generals may praise the system. But if the one remaining missile carries a strategic warhead, then the word success becomes meaningless. Israel has no real strategic depth. Its population centers, command systems, economic life, and political heart are concentrated in a small space. A single catastrophic strike could change the future of the country in minutes. This is why Israeli leaders think in terms of prevention, not punishment.
Retaliation after disaster is not enough when the first failure may be irreversible. For Washington, this creates a cruel dilemma. If America refuses to act, Israel may believe it has been abandoned at the most dangerous moment in its history. If America supports a strike, it may trigger the very escalation everyone fears. And if Israel acts alone, Washington may still be pulled into the fire afterward. This is how alliances become traps. The stronger partner promises protection. The weaker partner demands action. But when nuclear uncertainty enters the room, every promise becomes heavier. Iran understands this pressure. Tehran does not need to defeat Israel in a conventional war. It only needs to make Israeli leaders believe the cost of attack could be beyond calculation. That is deterrence. It is not about using the weapon. It is about placing fear inside the enemy's decision-making process. And once that fear enters, even the most advanced defense system cannot remove it completely. This is why the crisis feels so unstable. Israel cannot comfortably wait. America cannot comfortably strike. Iran cannot comfortably retreat. And the world cannot comfortably ignore the possibility that one missile, not one army, could decide the next chapter of the Middle East.
The 5-day pause looked weak only to people who still think war begins when bombs fall. In modern geopolitics, war often begins earlier, in silence, in logistics, in market signals, in diplomatic language, and in the slow movement of military assets that the public rarely sees. When Washington announces restraint, it does not always mean Washington has stopped. Sometimes restraint is the public face of preparation. This is why the pause deserves careful attention. If America strikes immediately, it owns the escalation from the first second. But if it offers a narrow window for negotiation, the political burden shifts. Tehran is placed under pressure. Allies are given time to align. Markets are given time to breathe. The public is given a story that sounds responsible. And if talks fail, Washington can say it tried diplomacy before force. That matters because modern war needs political packaging. No leader wants to appear reckless when oil prices are fragile, inflation is painful, and voters are tired of endless conflict. The pause is not only about Iran. It is about preparing the world to accept whatever comes next. Behind that pause, everything can still move. Naval groups can reposition. Air defenses can be reinforced. Intelligence can be shared. Evacuation plans can be updated. Regional partners can be warned. Financial institutions can prepare for energy shocks. Public words say calm. Private systems prepare for chaos. This is the dual language of great power strategy. Iran understands it too. Tehran knows that a deadline can be a trap, but also an opportunity. If it appears too defiant, it strengthens the case for attack. If it appears too weak, it damages the image of deterrence. So Iran must also perform carefully. It must show confidence without inviting destruction, flexibility without looking afraid, and silence without looking confused. This is why 5 days can feel longer than 5 months. Every hour becomes a signal. Every statement becomes a test. Every military movement becomes a message. The world is watching not only what leaders say, but what they prepare. And that is why calling the pause weakness is too simple. Weakness is when a country has no options. The pause may mean Washington has too many bad options and is trying to choose the least disastrous one. In a nuclear shadow crisis, delay is not always retreat. Sometimes delay is the last instrument left before history loses control. In the old world, generals planned wars and markets reacted afterward. In the new world, markets sit inside the war room before the first missile is launched. This is the part many people still misunderstand. A modern president does not only ask whether a strike can destroy the target, he must ask what happens to oil, shipping insurance, inflation, bond yields, currencies, and stock markets the next morning. That is why Iran is not only a military problem, it is a financial trigger. If the crisis touches Hormuz, energy prices can move before any ship is even hit. Traders do not wait for explosions. They price fear. Insurance companies do not wait for certainty. They price risk. Investors do not wait for official confirmation. They run from uncertainty. This gives Iran a different kind of leverage. Tehran does not need to defeat the American Navy to shake the global economy. It only needs to convince markets that supply routes may become unsafe. One warning, one drone incident, one missile near a tanker, one mining rumor, and the cost of global energy begins to climb. Then the battlefield moves into every household. Fuel becomes more expensive. Food costs rise. Factories pay more for transport. Central banks face new inflation pressure. Governments borrow at higher rates. Voters become angry. Suddenly, a military crisis in the Gulf becomes a political crisis in Washington, London, Berlin, Tokyo, and Seoul. This is why the 5-day pause mattered. It was not only diplomacy, it was market management. A pause can slow panic. It can give traders a reason not to price disaster immediately. It can give governments time to prepare strategic reserves, coordinate allies, and signal control. But control is fragile. Markets are psychological systems. Once fear spreads, even powerful governments struggle to reverse it. And this is where modern war becomes dangerous. The strongest military may still lose control of the economic chain reaction. America can destroy a site, but can it control oil prices afterward? It can move carriers, but can it force investors to stay calm? It can threaten Iran, but can it stop inflation from becoming a domestic political weapon? This is why markets now restrain war. They do not stop leaders from acting, but they raise the price of every action. In the 21st century, a missile does not land only on a target. It lands on supply chains, pension funds, grocery bills, elections, and public trust. That is why every major power is hesitating. Not because they lack weapons, but because they fear the invisible explosion after the visible one.
Hormuz is not just a waterway. It is the pressure point where military crisis becomes global pain. On a map, it looks narrow, almost fragile. But in real life, that narrow passage carries the anxiety of the world economy. Oil, gas, shipping routes, insurance contracts, military patrols, and political messages all pass through the same dangerous space. This is why Iran does not need to close Hormuz completely to create shock. Closure is the extreme scenario. Fear is enough. If tanker captains hesitate, if insurers raise prices, if shipping companies reroute, if traders believe one missile could hit one vessel, then Hormuz has already become a weapon. That is the genius and the danger of choke point politics. A small space can produce a global consequence. America can send warships, Britain can issue warnings, Gulf states can increase security, but nobody can make markets forget geography. Every barrel moving through that corridor carries a risk premium once conflict rises. And that risk premium eventually reaches ordinary people far away from the Gulf. A driver paying more for fuel in Europe, a factory paying more for transport in Asia, a government facing inflation before an election, a central bank afraid to cut interest rates. This is why Hormuz is bigger than the battlefield. It turns regional tension into global economic pressure. For Iran, this creates leverage without requiring full-scale war. Tehran can signal capability through drills, missile tests, naval movement, or even strategic ambiguity. The message is simple. If Iran's survival is threatened, the world economy will not remain untouched. Washington understands this message very well. That is why every military option must be measured not only by damage to Iran, but by damage to global confidence. A strike may last one night, but higher energy prices can last months. Panic can last longer. Political blame can last until the next election. And this is where Hormuz becomes more powerful than many weapons. It forces distant countries to care about a crisis they would rather ignore. It pulls China, India, Japan, Europe, and every energy-dependent economy into the calculation. Nobody wants Iran to dominate the strait, but nobody wants the strait to become a battlefield either. This is Iran's uncomfortable advantage. It sits near a place the world cannot afford to lose. And as long as Hormuz remains exposed, every threat against Tehran carries a shadow price for everyone else. China does not need to fire a missile to gain from this crisis. It only needs to watch Washington become trapped between force and restraint. That is the quiet advantage Beijing understands better than most capitals. Every time America is pulled deeper into the Middle East, attention moves away from Asia. Every carrier sent toward the Gulf is also a signal in the Pacific. Every diplomatic hour spent calming Israel, Iran, oil markets, and Arab partners is an hour not spent tightening pressure around China. This is how patience becomes strategy. Beijing does not have to openly support Tehran. It does not have to provoke Washington. It can simply present itself as the calm power, the stable economy, the country willing to talk while others threaten war. And in moments of global fear, the calm actor often gains influence without appearing aggressive. If America needs help stabilizing energy markets, supply chains, or diplomatic channels, China suddenly becomes more valuable. But in great power politics, help is never free. Beijing can quietly ask for room, fewer technology restrictions, softer trade pressure, less aggressive military posturing, or more respect for its regional interests. The request may not be spoken publicly. It does not need to be.
Leverage often works best when it remains invisible. This is why the Iran crisis is also a China story, not because Beijing controls Tehran, but because American distraction benefits Chinese strategy. Washington wants to contain China, support Ukraine, protect Israel, pressure Iran, reassure Europe, stabilize oil, and manage domestic politics at the same time. No empire can do everything with equal focus forever. China's strength is not that it wins every battle. Its strength is that it often waits for others to exhaust themselves. Iran creates pressure. Hormuz creates economic fear. Israel demands guarantees. Markets demand calm. Voters demand lower prices. And through all of this, Beijing watches the American system stretch. That stretch is the opportunity. If Washington strikes, China can condemn instability. If Washington hesitates, China can question American credibility. If markets panic, China can offer coordination. If diplomacy resumes, China can claim responsibility as a stabilizing power. In every direction, Beijing has room to maneuver. This is the art of winning without direct confrontation. Let your rival spend power. Let your rival carry the blame. Let your rival face the contradiction between military dominance and economic vulnerability. Then step forward as the patient alternative. That is why China may be the quiet winner of a crisis it did not start. Iran's nuclear thinking cannot be understood only through centrifuges, missiles, or uranium. It must be understood through memory. Tehran looks at the modern world and sees a pattern that Western capitals prefer not to discuss. States that surrender their final deterrent receive promises. States that keep one receive caution. Libya publicly renounced its weapons programs in 2003, hoping for normalization and relief from isolation. Years later, its government collapsed under foreign-backed military pressure, and that story became a warning for every regime facing Western hostility. Ukraine offers another lesson. After the Soviet collapse, Kyiv gave up the world's third-largest nuclear arsenal under the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, expecting security assurances that later looked painfully weak when war arrived. For Iran, these examples are not academic history. They are survival case studies. The conclusion in Tehran is simple. Paper guarantees do not stop bombs, and diplomatic language does not stop regime change. This is why Western proposals may no longer sound convincing. Sanctions relief can be reversed. Agreements can be abandoned. Inspections can become intelligence maps. Promises can disappear after elections. But a credible deterrent changes how enemies behave. It does not make Iran safe. It makes attacking Iran more dangerous. That is the difference. Washington sees nuclear capability as a threat to order. Tehran sees it as insurance against destruction. And when two sides define the same object in opposite ways, negotiation becomes extremely difficult. To America, dismantlement means peace. To Iran, dismantlement may mean vulnerability. To Israel, delay feels like danger. To China and Russia, the crisis proves that Western security guarantees no longer persuade everyone. This is the real legacy of Libya and Ukraine. They taught weaker states to distrust verbal protection and respect hard power. Whether that lesson is morally right is not the point. Strategically, it is powerful. Iran has watched the evidence and drawn its conclusion. If you are disliked by Washington, never trade your final shield for temporary relief. Because one day, the relief may end, the guarantees may fade, and the aircraft may still come. That is why this crisis is so hard to reverse. The nuclear issue is no longer only about weapons. It is about trust after trust has already died. The most dangerous moment in international politics is not always when missiles are flying. Sometimes it is the pause before leaders admit that the old rules no longer work. That is where the world stands now. America still believes military superiority can restore control. Israel still believes preemption can remove danger before danger becomes permanent. Iran believes deterrence is the only language its enemies respect. China believes patience can turn another country's crisis into strategic leverage. Each side thinks it is being rational. That is exactly why the situation is so dangerous. History rarely breaks because one leader becomes irrational. It breaks because every leader follows a logic that collides with everyone else's logic. Washington wants credibility. Israel wants survival. Tehran wants insurance. Beijing wants advantage. Markets want calm. Voters want cheap energy. But these goals cannot all be satisfied at the same time. Someone must retreat, compromise, or miscalculate. And miscalculation is now the greatest threat. A radar error, a missile interception failure, a drone strike misunderstood, a tanker incident in Hormuz, a speech translated as weakness,
a deadline interpreted as preparation for war. Any small event can become the spark that forces leaders to respond publicly before they are ready privately. This is why nuclear shadow crises are so unforgiving. The weapon does not need to be used to change history. It only needs to exist inside the imagination of decision-makers. Once leaders believe one mistake could become irreversible, they begin acting from fear, and fear is not a stable foundation for strategy. The final warning is this: the Middle East is no longer only a regional battlefield. It is now connected to oil prices, global inflation, supply chains, alliance credibility, nuclear precedent, and the balance between America and China. A strike against one facility can become a market shock. A market shock can become political instability. Political instability can become strategic weakness. Strategic weakness can invite the next crisis. This is how empires lose control slowly, then suddenly. So what comes next? Not certainty, not peace, not immediate world war. What comes next is a period of dangerous waiting, where every country pretends to control events while quietly fearing that events may control them. And if there is one lesson from this crisis, it is brutally simple. Once nuclear deterrence enters the room, even the strongest power must lower its voice.